So here we're talking about supporting practices. This is our 7th module. If you have done the 6th module, you know that these are only 2 of the 3 supporting practices. To get us started thinking about immediate specific feedback and maintaining a brisk pace, I want to start with the general question of how do the supporting practices we describe maximize student engagement? And again, we're going to talk specifically about immediate specific feedback, and we're going to give you some techniques for that. Our goal is for you to learn how to use those. And then again, for maintaining a brisk pace, how to do that to maximize student engagement. The last thing we're going to discuss is when you're working with students who have intensive intervention needs, how do you adapt a lesson or adapt a program to make it more explicit for students by incorporating supporting practices more. And that's really exciting because now we get to think directly about how do we apply this in the classroom. So in our explicit instruction model, if you've seen this before, and hopefully you have, you know there are 3 pieces to it. The first one is sort of a reddish orangey, first one is kind of a goldenrod sort of color, mustard color. And what is that one? That one is modeling with clear explanation and plain examples. Next one over here is sort of orangey colors, practice, both guided and independent. And then the thing we're focusing on here, if you remember from last slide, 2 slides ago, is supporting practices with effective methods to elicit responses, and then these 2 things. And obviously, we've already talked about, if you did Module 6, effective methods to elicit responses. So here we're going to talk about these 2 things, providing immediate specific feedback and maintaining a brisk pace. And this is all in service of engagement. And by engagement, I'm like even afraid to say this. We're not talking. Gosh, we're not talking about a wedding, right? We're not talking about getting engaged. I'm sorry I even said it. And then we're not talking about, again, bells and whistles. I'm real sorry, but we had to just kind of get your heads in the game. But we're not talking about those things, okay? Even though, and this is a bad example of what we do not want you to do. We'll start off with that just to make it a little entertaining. So we're not talking about this stuff. We're not, especially the bells and whistles. We're not talking about just making it fun. What are we talking about? We're talking about getting students' cognitive effort focused on processing lesson content. It's important to think about what that means. The goal is for students' heads to be focusing on whatever you're teaching specifically. So that they are focusing their cognitive energy so that eventually they will show that they've made changes to their cognitive system that reflect learning. So ultimately what we're saying here is engagement results in learning. But engagement doesn't need to be about fun. It needs to be about whatever it is that will get students' brains focused on the content. And sometimes it's going to be greatly fun, and sometimes it might not be so fun, but as long as it's not boring and students aren't focusing somewhere else, if their cognitive effort is focused there, then we're all good. The thing about these supporting practices is they will maximize student engagement. These are time-tested, often used practices that really help you assure that students are going to be engaged in the content. And the first thing we're going to talk about here is feedback. And feedback happens in response to a response that you've elicited. So you elicit a response. So here's the context here. I want students to quickly show me they're processing the content. At that moment, if you've learned about all the different things you need to think about when you elicit responses in the previous module, you decide what makes the most sense, thinking particularly about the number of students you want involved, which is usually all of them, and the amount of time you want to take, which is in this case a very short period of time. And one effective way to do that is to get a core response from students. So then I give students a question or I give them instructions that are designed to elicit the response. So I say the word is exhibit, what's the word? And then I have a system for getting students to respond. I sort of put my hands out as Anita Archer teaches, and if you did Module 5, you've seen that before. I say everyone, I gesture toward the students, and they all say exhibit. So I use this method to get that response. So that's all eliciting responses. Here what we're saying is, after that, the feedback is what we're giving to students next. And in this case, we're giving affirmative feedback because the answer was correct from all of the students. So the goal is to get us to the point where we're providing the kind of feedback that's going to help students maximize their engagement by helping them focus on cognitively processing the content. A big piece of that is the feedback tells them when they're on the right track or shift things when they're not quite on the right track so that they can maintain that cognitive processing. They don't end up with their working memory systems overloaded with information, as we talked about in Module 5, if you did that module. So let's take a look at a video to see whether or not students are engaged. I want you to think about how the teacher is providing feedback, and then, since we're talking about pacing as well, how the teacher paces the instruction in order to get the students to be successful. So let's take a look at the video, and you can see how the teacher does this with the students.
In terms of bond length, how is bond length related to bond energy or bond enthalpy? All right, let me put it this way. The longer the bond, then what? The more what? Stop. Listen to my question. Which type of bond, let me rephrase it, which type of bond will take more energy to break? A long bond or a short bond?
Short bond.
Why short? Right, they're closer together, which indicates they're more stable and therefore requires more enthalpy or more energy to break. Enthalpy, another word for energy. Okay? Remember that much? So if you got a couple of atoms, you got a single, double, and a triple bond, which bond will be the shortest? Single, double, triple? Triple. The more bonds you have, the shorter the bond is going to be, assuming you have the same elements bonded together. So which of those bonds will have the highest bond enthalpy? A single, double, or triple bond? Triple. Because if it's triple, it's shorter, and therefore will take more energy to break all three of the bonds. Okay? Got that much? All right. What other questions do you have?
Okay, so let's think about whether or not the students are engaged in this case. And I want to think about the feedback and the pacing of the instruction. So what I do want to go back to is some of the things from eliciting responses that you noticed. And so you probably, now that you've done that module, picked up on a few things, like a number of rhetorical questions, like you've got that much, any questions, not so good there. You also noticed that the teacher doesn't have a particular routine for eliciting choral responses, and the questions the teacher asks are too complex to use a choral response, but the teacher does it anyway. But let's flip over now to talking about the feedback the teacher provides. In some cases in this example, the teacher provides very poor feedback by saying, for example, stop. That's not good feedback. Obviously, you can tell that the teacher is not super pleased with what the students have done, but that's not specific in any meaningful way, and so it's not going to help the students process the lesson content. You do see, however, there are cases where the teacher gets a response and the teacher will revoice it, will provide other information to support it to help the students move forward. But already at the beginning, by saying stop, the teacher sort of set off the lesson in the wrong direction. You can also see there that the pacing of the instruction is quite brisk. The question is whether or not students are with the teacher as the teacher is doing it. Brisk does not mean plowing ahead whether or not the students are with you. And so that's a key piece about the instruction. Returning to the feedback, it's also the case that the teacher isn't giving feedback to all of the students. The teacher is giving feedback to the whole class in a very general way based on a kind of cacophony of responses that the teacher is hearing. And so it's not a great example of how to give the specific feedback. It's not specific to the individual responses. It's specific to some general sort of commentary happening in the classroom. So that's the video. And so now let's think about all of that in terms of the providing feedback checklist. So there are two things that are critical for providing feedback. One is that it's immediate after the student delivers a response, and two, that it's specific to students' actions. So we're going to talk about how to do those things when we get to providing feedback. For maintaining a brisk pace, this means that you should move on when students are ready, and you should use the other supporting practices along the way to make sure that students are staying with you. So think about these in the context of the DBI framework. These practices are some of the supporting practices that will maximize the use of explicit instruction, maximize student engagement. So when you make an adaptation that involves increasing explicit instruction use, you're using these practices that will do that. Okay. So now let's think about why supporting practices, what are the supporting practices that increase engagement and high quality instructional interactions, and why are those important? We're going to go to a quote that if you did Module 6, you've seen before. And I'll read this to you. You can read along with me. And you can kind of see the key words in blue and, well, in color. Even when you have crafted an exquisite, well-structured lesson or adopted a curriculum material with explicit lessons of high quality, it is still possible that some students may not be totally riveted to your every word or deeply processing the lesson content. What does that mean? If you've already seen this before, think about what it means in terms of providing feedback and in terms of pacing. In terms of feedback, students won't necessarily be riveted if they're not getting feedback, that they know that they're on track, or if they feel frustrated because they don't know if they're right or they're wrong and they haven't been given any guidance to make them sort of feel more successful at the content. And in terms of the pacing, being riveted doesn't just have to do with being fast, but if you provide instruction at a good pace, students will be more engaged. It doesn't mean that you just race through things. It also doesn't mean that you go slow simply because you think your students are having difficulty with a concept. If you break the concepts into very individualized pieces, just like we talked about if you did Module 5 with the stones in the bowl, if you break it into those individual pieces, you can move through each one at a relatively brisk pace. Students will still pick up on it. They will become riveted to your every word. And so if you've got the basic content there, if you've come up with good models and good practice, and all of that is in place, you use then those supporting practices to make the whole thing fit together. So with that, here we have the Module 7 activities. We're going to have quizzes. You'll have an opportunity to look at a discussion board. There's a reading that goes with this module. There's a journal entry. We're going to talk about ways. We'll start something, and then you'll finish. And finally, there'll be a classroom application. For the classroom application, it'll begin with a journal entry. So you're going to focus on one supporting practice from across all the supporting practices, because the end here, we're going to be bringing it all together and thinking about this as an adaptation. So how will you, in an upcoming lesson, change your lesson, how will you adapt the lesson to make it more explicit by incorporating the selected supporting practice that you've used? So it's one of the three. It's eliciting responses, it's pacing, or it's providing feedback. I did it in the wrong order, but one of those three things. And then you're going to implement the lesson that you described in your journal entry. And if you have a coach, you'll talk with a coach about the lesson. If you're in a class, your instructor hopefully will have you videotape it and have you review it together. And if you are doing this with a partner or on your own, it'll be an opportunity for you to talk with a peer about how you did it, because it's not enough just to do it. You've got to have an opportunity to talk about it, to think about how that went. So that's the overview of this module. So hopefully you're ready now to go into the parts. And we're going to talk about what two things? We're going to talk about providing immediate specific feedback, and then we'll talk about brisk pacing. So here we go.